So, I'm Bryan. We're going to talk about RESTful services. Let's go from there. Let's get into our little slideshow. I don't have a ton of slides. I will tell you right now that this is a 4-hour training course I give, and we're going to go through it in about 45 minutes, give or take. So clearly, I'm not going to just gloss over stuff. I'm going to force feed you a bunch of information. So you're going to see some in-depth stuff. I don't like high-level 30,000-foot view type presentations. All right, so Jersey, I've rolled out multiple Jersey implementations. Come on in, sit down. I've rolled out multiple Jersey implementations across multiple companies along the Wasatch Front. I worked for Software Technology Group for 14 years. We're a local consulting group. You name a company, I've worked there, or we have an employee that's worked there. Newskin, Zango, Novell, Domo, the LDS Church, Flying J, CR England. Pick one. I worked there, or a friend of mine worked there. Any state agency, worked at every state agency there is. Health, Human Services, ABC, DTS. So, and at a lot of these, I've rolled out Jersey implementations. I'm also a Pluralsight author. A bunch of you snuck in after the fact. Make sure you see me afterwards because I've got some free training passes for you guys for a month of free training. That's where this 4-hour course is at. I'll just wait for a second and clearly this is a hard room to find. So we'll let everybody kind of shuffle in.
Well, Keynote just ended.
Oh, that's fine. Yeah. Well, this is a hard room to find. So who doesn't have one of these cards? You guys do. Thanks. Thank you.
So let's see what I'm doing here.
Yes, you want more?
All right. This is how I like to see a room. This is better. I was all sad when I thought there were going to be 20 people in my presentation. As I started mentioning earlier, there is not all the Java tracks for today are in this room. So anything Java related is in this room. I did not get a second call for paper submitted in time. I was sick. So at the end of this course, think about it, but a show of hands at 3 p.m. if anybody wants to see another course on Java, I can off the hip do Spring MVC, Spring Security, do something on Maven. So think about a course you guys may want to see at 3 p.m. and if there's enough interest, I will do another course at 3 p.m. Just kind of not shoot from the hip. I've already got the material, but it's all we'll make one up for what you guys want to see with that. All right. So to recap for everybody that just came in. I've been a Java developer for 17, 18 years, worked for a local consulting company called Software Technology Group. I rolled out Jersey implementations all across the Wasatch Front. I actually gave the same presentation at the Java User Group in January, if any of you guys saw that. If you don't go to the Java User Group, I can tell you, did you see that disaster? That was awesome. My laptop imploded, so we're hoping that doesn't happen there. If you don't go to the UJUG, I would tell you to definitely go to the UJUG. It's a great resource. We get a lot of great presenters there, so that's my little plug for them. I'm also a Pluralsight author. Most of you now have a Pluralsight card. The few of you that snuck in at the end there, come see me at the end. I got a whole stack of Pluralsight cards. It's a free 1-month subscription. It's great. I tell you to use it. All right, let's get rolling. Why Jersey? So the title of this presentation is RESTful Services in Java using Jersey. So why Jersey? Is it because they have an amazing logo? Absolutely not. Of all the Java logos, I think Jersey has the stupidest logo out there. No, why Jersey? Well, Jersey is a standard. It is the JAX WS implementation. So it is an official standard inside of it. If you go use other tools that are out there, maybe some of you have used Apache CXF or you've looked at some of the stuff that's even offered up by Spring. By the way, if you've never seen me present before, I am the biggest Spring advocate there is. I love all things Spring. I think it's great. But I really like Jersey. Why? Because it's a standard. It is also one of the most feature-rich ones that's out there. So as far as your RESTful service implementation is concerned, they cover most features you want out there. The ones they aren't good at, nobody's good at. All right? It's also a great foundation for building a client. So if you want to use something like StreamMC or even Apache CXF, their client tools aren't that good for building a deliverable client. That is a whole other architectural discussion that we could have, of course, just on that, about why you should deliver a client with your RESTful services. There's things like caching, like security, batch processing. There's a ton of reasons, exception handling, error handling, how you handle responses back to your server, and just generally how you want people interacting with your service. There's reasons why you should deliver a client with your RESTful service. Everybody goes, oh, it's just JSON, it's just stuff I'm passing around, what do I care? You want a client with your RESTful service. I really like the annotations for Jersey. The annotations are less verbose for Jersey than other frameworks that are out there, and I think that's a good thing. We're actually going to kind of cover that today. It's really easy to get started with. To use Jersey, there is a very simple Maven goal that we're going to execute from an archetype that sets up our project structure for us. Why REST? Anybody in here using SOAP right now? Yeah, a handful of you. Okay, so are a bunch of you guys looking at using REST this year, or just want to know about REST, or you're already using REST, you just want to know more about REST? Want to know more? All right. Any of you guys using Spring? By a show of hands, who's using Spring up there? All right, so I like this talk. I used to always ask this whenever I presented in the Java user group. How many people thought they were Java developers in the room? The whole room would raise their hand. And then I say, well, how many of you using JSF? And like a quarter of the room would raise their hand. What you find out is that there is no such thing as a Java developer. There's a Maven, Spring MVC, JPA, Hibernate developer. There's a JSF, Seam, a Hibernate developer, or whatever. So there's all these different frameworks. So I always like to see what's going on out there. Well, why REST? REST is great. It's lightweight, it's easy, it's fun for us to use. It's a lot more simple than, here's another chair. There's a couple, I guess I'm grabbing most of the front here. REST is great. It's great to use. We have all of these nice features of REST that we want to take advantage of. HTTP verbs. REST is not just HTTP verbs, all right? If you think of REST as just HTTP verbs, that's sort of cheating. People know what I mean by that, by the HTTP verbs. So the post and get. How many of you guys wrote servlets back in the day? All right, so a bunch of us. What's the first thing we did when we wrote a servlet? We would override the do post and do get method or the service method to redirect it to one method. Now that's kind of a cheat. It's kind of a hack. Well, we have people kind of try to do the same thing with REST, and that's not really fully utilizing the power of what we have with REST. What I mean by that is put. So a lot of people skip put, and they do all their creates and updates through their post method. All right? What is idempotent? Do you know what idempotent means? Who knows what idempotent means?
You can do the same thing over and over and over and get the same results out.
Exactly. If I keep calling it, I'm going to get the same result out of it. So what this means is posts are typically used for creates. If I keep calling post, I'm going to keep creating services or keep creating objects inside my system. But put is used as an update. And so if I keep calling put, it's just going to keep updating the same record. In other words, it's not going to change. The first time I call it, it will change. I call it 100 times after that, it's not going to change. So put is idempotent. So when people start skipping around and saying, oh, we just do post and get, I don't worry about put or delete, they're really skipping half of the REST API that's out there. With put, you know what your ID is. That's kind of the whole point of it. With a post, you don't. Kind of giving you just a high-level recap of why REST, not necessarily why Jersey. How many of you are looking at or have heard of HATEOAS or Hypermedia? Okay, very few of you. Very few people raise their hands. And I bring this up because this is a very, very, very important topic that we're not going to cover. HATEOAS or Hypermedia, and this is a stupid acronym, Hypermedia as a transactional representative of blah, blah, blah. I can't even tell you what the acronym is. Everybody calls it HATEOAS. What it is that you need to write smart services. So I would venture to guess, and I am putting myself in this boat, 99% of the time we write stupid services. And what I mean by a stupid service is a service that just serves what little piece I need it to. What I mean by that is I need to create a car. So I'm going to call it a service that creates a car. Yeah, well, duh, that sounds great. That's exactly what I want the service to do. That's fine, except as a client, I have to know what I have to package to create a car. I know what service I have to call to create a car. I have to know every little bit of information I need to call that. What if I want to get a list of cars or an individual car back? Well, what Hypermedia is your service is smart and starts sending that information to the client. Now, I won't go any more detail on that, but basically think of it as an endpoint that I only know one URL to my application. And right now, if you're writing services, if you have 50 services, you know 50 endpoints. Well, if you're using Hypermedia, you know one endpoint, and that's your starting point into an application. So as you're thinking about REST, as you're thinking about architectural decisions, think about Hypermedia and HATEOAS. There's a bunch of new stuff that just barely came out, really months ago, or not even that, a couple weeks ago, on Spring with HATEOAS. The new Spring 4 release is all around HATEOAS as far as the web services are concerned. All right, let's get started. Enough about me yakking different stuff. Let's talk Maven. So is everybody here using Maven?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, that's good. There is an archetype out there for this. It's really long. If you go to Jersey's website and say, I want to start using Maven, or start using Jersey, you can't go download Jersey. They hand you this exact archetype and say, go use it through this archetype. All right, so you can't go download Jersey anymore. If you do, you could go hunt around and find the jars, but it's not going to do you any good. So if you start using Jersey, you're going to use this Maven archetype. And it's good. It gives a good structure for the server, but to build a client, I would set my project as a multi-module project. So you guys familiar with a multi-module project in Maven? It's just a little bit of a shift. As we go through the code today, I'll show you what I mean by this is great to get an application up and running, but as far as a long-term solution for your company to roll out, this isn't how I would do it. All right? All right, so let's get started. I'm going to build a client, import it into Spring STS, and we'll hit the little hello world example with this URL here. So pull up a terminal here, and I type really fast, so where I use the history of my terminal. You're going to see this go through. I've already downloaded this once before. There was a whole great big history that rolls off the screen. You know, you've seen Maven, you know what it does. So for our group ID, I'm going to do org.openwest. And for our artifact ID, we'll just call this rest-example. And from there, I'm just going to take the defaults. Voila, it's done, it's built. I'm going to switch over to Spring STS. How do you guys use Eclipse versus Spring STS? Anybody? Let me just rephrase that. Is anybody using Spring STS in here? All right. More of you should go look at Spring STS because it's Eclipse without the headaches. So let's import an existing Maven project. I can browse to it. Okay, so it pulls it in there. That archetype created a basic project structure for me that I've got, my standard Maven directory, source main Java. I've got my class path all set up. You can see the Maven dependencies it already imported for me. Everything's all up and running. I've got a Tomcat server down here defined that I can just add that project to it. And pull it up. Everything's good there. And now I can pull up a browser and voila, Yay, my Hello World example worked. So let's talk about what this just did. This actually is a full-featured application. Their archetype sets up my project for me. I've got all my stuff in my palm that it goes through and sets up all my class path, all the versions, all the jars, all that stuff. But what's important about this is it sets up my web.xml for me. Now, the web.xml, right now, nothing super interesting, and yes, I know it's small in the back because I wasn't planning on spending any time in here, so I didn't increase the font. But it set up my servlet mapping, set up Jersey, gets my packages all scanned for me, gets it up and running. Not the part I really care about. The part I care about is my controller. It sets up my web service for me. Now, as I talked about Jersey being a lot less verbose than Spring MVC or some of the other tools that are out there, notice, I have a path, says that my path is my resource. I'm telling it that I'm going to use get for my HTTP verb. I also have a produces, which says what type of output this RESTful service is going to be. So it's telling it, hey, I'm using text plain. We're going to change that because you never would have a RESTful services that just dumps out text plain. And then I return a simple string that says got it. Okay? If I'm doing this with, until 4 weeks ago, Spring, I'd have to have an at response body, an at request mapping, and a bunch of other goo in here, as well as a dispatcher servlet configuration file that would have to route all this stuff through it. So already the configuration for this is a tenth of what I'd have to do with Spring to get this out. So let's switch back to our slides here. Now, our first step, we talked about the structure. So it builds our class path structure for us. We talked about the web.xml that it's already set that up for us, as well as looked at the produces and consumes. This right now just publishes out text plain. Okay, we're going to change that. We also looked at the HTTP method, which was an HTTP get. And all we had to do to use that was the @get annotation. Now, to look at the same thing in a Spring versus Jersey configuration that I was kind of mentioning, removing the dispatcher servlet and that configuration out of here, I have a controller annotation, I have a request mapping value equals /greeting. Notice that this method here doesn't even have the HTTP method, the verb associated with it of get versus post. And to return a string, I have to add it to my model and return that object back out of my model. All right, so a lot more work to get that basic same thing. All right, this, I am saying that I want it to be a get. I'm also saying what media type it produces. This one doesn't even say what media type it produces. And to return something in my model, I just return the object out of that method call. All right. So you're starting to see why I like Jersey a little bit better than doing this stuff through Spring. Now, let's talk about the path. So path, sorry, there's a creaky floor and it drives me nuts. Path, as you're doing RESTful URLs, your path is really why we like REST. It's being able to grab components off of our RESTful URL and utilize them. And the way we do that is with the path annotation. The beauty of this is that I can just keep adding paths to each other. They'll append on one another. So if I want to do a path annotation, and this string is up to me. My string is resource ID. It doesn't have to be called resource ID. This could be foo, could be bar, could be whatever. I use path. But to pass in something off of my URL, I can just go through and say @path above my method, and then take and pass in as a path parameter what string I want injected into what parameter variable, what method variable, and I've got it. So let's go ahead and look at that. As I come in here, now I've got my path up here, and if I want to add to this path down here, I can say @path and do something like resource ID. Oops, gotta have that in curly braces. And now I have available for me to use inside my method. Param. And I can just say my path param, resource ID, string resource ID, and that's all I have to do to pass in path parameter variables. It's pretty easy. So to run this, it's already deployed, but we'll restart it just for good measure. And I can pass in on the end of that 1, 2, 3, 4, and it automatically comes through. So to add path parameters and to start grabbing stuff off of my URL, simple annotation. And I can have multiples. I can do 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I can have it 10 levels deep. It doesn't matter. And I can keep appending them on to one another. So it works out really slick. To do that same thing in Spring MVC, my path up here would be a controller, and then this would be a resource mapping down here and the request method associated with it. So again, a little simpler to use. All right, now let's start getting into some fun stuff, because right now I've shown you a bunch of stuff that you probably already know. So let's start diving into architecture of why you should be doing things with your RESTful services and how you should be handling them. One sticky issue for people with RESTful services is, how do I handle errors, or what's a valid response? And I've seen it all different ways, and I'm not going to say that there's a right way or a wrong way, because that's a very loaded term. But I'm sure every one of you have faced a point in your side of your application where you have an exception that you want to convey back to the client. And how do you go about that? I could ask every one of you, and I would come up with 100 different ways. And none of them are necessarily more right or more wrong than another. But I'm going to show you a couple of things that Jersey does that I think make that decision easier. Since we're using the HTTP verbs, why not use the response codes that we already have in there? And everybody goes, yeah, I already do that. We've got the 404 or stuff like that we throw back. I'm going to show you a little different here. All right, so everybody knows that 200 is an OK, 401 is not unauthorized, 404 not found, and a 500 server error. There's 300s, there's actually 415, which was an unsupported media type, there's an April Fool's one, there's a whole bunch of stuff we've thrown out there. But there's all these response codes that are already in the server, and your server, your router, your firewall, all of that stuff already knows how to handle it, and clients know how to work with that from an architectural perspective. So let me show you what I'm talking about here. As we get into it, we can have a valid response. So everything we've been doing so far has been a valid response. So what's been getting sent back to our client was an HTTP 200 code. All right. So to do that same thing, or to longhand that same response out that we're building right now, Jersey has this very nice response object already built into it. And the response object, I can say, oh, I'm going to send back an OK, in other words, a 200 response. And I'm going to tack an entity onto that and return that entity. All right, this is just the longhand version of what we just had. Okay? But what about an invalid response? So to do an invalid response, a request that was valid, how many of you guys, I'm sure everybody's done XML development here at some point. Before I dive into dissecting this, what's the difference between valid XML and well-formed XML? Is anybody going to bite on that one? Chickens. Come on.
Valid XML conform to a schema, and well-formed is just as text.
There you go. So now I'm going to ask you a loaded question. Is HTML valid?
No, HTML is crazy.
Right answer. It's neither valid nor well-formed. Yeah. So that's your answer there. Valid versus well-formed is completely different. And I like this analogy because everybody's they've bumped up against that in XML at some point in their development. A well-formed document, a well-formed XML document, just basically is, if I have an opening tag, I have a closing tag. If I have opening double quotes, I have closing double quotes. If I have an attribute, it's set up the right way. I have an equal sign and all that stuff. Now, valid means I've got a schema or a DTD or some structure surrounding it that I can go run it through something to validate that it is what it says it is. So this field will only accept a numeric, and it has to be in this range. Or this field will only accept strings. Okay, so that's the difference between valid and well-formed. And I like that analogy when talking about RESTful services, because my request is valid. If I hit the server and the server responds, that's still a valid request. My contract was correct with that service. It was well-formed and it was valid. If it wasn't well-formed, I couldn't even hit the server. So if I forget to send a URL, that's not a valid request. If I hit the server and it responds back to me, it's well-formed and it's valid. It may not be the response I want. I may get a 404 error or a 401 or something else, but it's valid and it's well-formed. All right? Where I'm kind of going with that is one of my favorite features of Jersey is that we're gonna write this code out here in a second. I can make a request, and I put a bogus URL in here, not found, and we're gonna mimic it. I can return a 404 error and return an entity associated with it. Now that entity could be an exception that I have packaged up and sent the error message back to them. It could even be their original search criteria. So think about it, you're writing a client, you want to pass back what they typed in for their search. I can hand their search object back to them and say, hey, here's what you requested, and here's why it was invalid. And they can look at it and go, oh, okay. So think about it as far as a client-server response of what I'm looking for. But I am sending back a 404 not found error. Well, and I'll show you how this works here in a second. So let's go ahead and throw this together, and I'll show you what it does. Notice this last bullet point. The result might not be what you expect. All right? This is where browsers try to get a little smart with us. So let's switch over here. And I'll throw in here a method real quick. So let's just do @get and do @path. And we're going to make this, let's keep it the same thing. We'll just make this not found. And we can pass in our resource ID. And that looks good there. Let's do an let's not go into the, we'll do @produces even. Okay, inside of here, I'm just going to copy this whole thing. Inside of here, let's do get not found resource. Oh, that looks good. Now we're going to use the response object. The response object is great. Response. One thing to keep note, notice how I've got this IntelliSense help up. There are a couple other responses out there, so just my word of caution to you, slow down for a second, look at what you're putting in there, because one of these seems like it should almost even be in there, and that is the Java X XML.ws, which stands for web service, but it's not the one we want. We want the one from JAX WS RS core, java.ws.rs.core. So there's our response object, and inside of here, we're going to say response dot, and we're going to do status, and you can pass in all the int codes. Now they have an enum for you to help utilize this stuff. So we can do status dot. And you can see all the ones that are out here available for you to use. So all this stuff's already there for you guys to take advantage of. Most people just don't know to do it. I've got some that I'm never going to return to a client your gateway timed out or things like that. You could if you wanted to. I'm going to just do a not found. And And look at this. Okay, before I step forward, until I get really excited about web services. Not implemented. So how many times have you guys been waiting for the database team to get their act together and get you this stuff, or somebody else inside your organization to finish up their part of development, but you want to start stubbing out your code and kind of get moving on some of the stuff in your code? Well, you've got a feature here to return not implemented to them. You can go start setting up all of your back-end services and legitimately return them an error saying, hey, that one's not implemented yet. Totally legitimate. I've seen people spend more time and come up with less successful error messages from type-checked exceptions inside of their Java code. I've got all these available. Let's use them. So theirs are not found. Now, this is what I do like about this. I can return an entity with my error message. So there's my not found, and I'm going to do a build on the end of this and save this. Now, it's going to redeploy. I will pull up my browser here, and we changed the URL, so I'm going to do not found. Let's hit enter. Okay, wait a second. I told it I had a 404, and it came back and returned my object still. Why?
You told it to return that.
I did, but I told it I got a 404. Whenever you ever ask for a 404, it comes back and gives you garbage, right?
Well, usually you get a 404 where you don't connect with what you're looking for. Here you've actually connected.
Exactly. So it's kind of a little bit of a mind shift. It returned back a 404. Remember that whole valid and well-formed response? I'm giving it a valid response back, and I'm sending it content back. So my browser didn't do what we're used to seeing and used to thinking about by giving me some ugly 404 Tomcat server page and said, nope, here's your 404 response, and here's the content you sent me with it. Think of it in terms of if you've ever built custom error pages inside of your application, you hit a 404 error and then return them this custom error page, kind of the same mindset. Now, there's a tool called Postman or Poster, and I'm kind of jumping ahead a little bit, but we need to because of time anyway. See this little guy here? This is a plugin for Chrome, and there's for Firefox. I don't care about IE. You can look at it yourself. I don't know. But I can use Poster or I can use Postman. Both of them are great. If one's not working for me for some reason, I switch to the other and use it till it doesn't work and switch back. But I can go inside of here and post in this URL and do get, and look at what comes back. Look at my status. So it legitimately gave me the correct status back of 404 not found, gives me some basic information, plus it also gives me my content. So look at the power associated with that for me giving you back a valid error message or content you sent me and still handling the response code. So the tool is doing what it's supposed to be doing. Our browsers are just trying to be a little bit more helpful by not showing us ugly stack traces or things on our screen and showing us the content that it returns. So even though our browser got a 404 back, it just displayed the content, didn't tell you there was an error that happened behind the scenes. All right, so if you're not using Postman or Poster, use it. That's all I'll say about that. Now, let's switch back over here. Now, let's look at the produces consume stuff. So this is where I think that Jersey really, really shines. This is all dealing with return types, what I want my service to return. So we've looked at get, we haven't done post, it's the same as get, it doesn't matter, it's just still the URL rewriting, we post it up in the form body. But we can do really slick things with these type save, or not these type, with these enums, doing app produces media type.json. And I'm going to let you guys in on a little secret today. We'll first start with XML, but your method can consume XML and produce JSON, or it can both consume and produce just JSON, or it can produce JSON and produce XML based on what you ask for. So it will look at your header information that comes across and decide what content type you want based off of what the annotations are in there. So you can mix and match, you can do whatever you want with it, and it's really slick that way. It's really user-friendly. So let's build on this. Let's add an app produces, and I will tell you I'm going to break this. I found I have to tell that so people don't think I'm full of crap. So we come over here, and we have this. Let's go back to, let's rewrite this one the right way. So this was our original get. And let's just do our response here. Response. We'll do response dot okay. And we'll also do a dot entity. We'll return our resource ID as well. Dot build. Now save this. Make sure this guy works. I'm sure that it does, but we'll do it just to make sure. Get. There's our 200 response, and there's our text that comes back. Great. Let's put an object out there. A string's stupid. Let's do something that's credible. So let's go back into our code, and let's create a new package. Do a new package, and we'll do .model with cap locks. And let's just create a class. We'll do a car, whatever. So here's our car. Inside of here, I'm going to put a couple of strings. Let's do a private string make, private string model. Save that. Right click, source, generate getters and setters. Okay. Save that guy. Now we've got a car. All right, standard Pojo. All right. And inside of here, when we call this, let's just do car equals new car. And car.setMake on the car.setModel, and we'll do Civic. All right, now let's take, and instead of returning that resource ID, let's return car. And to start with, let's leave it as text plain. All right. So bounce that server, come down here, pull Postman back up, and do get. I'm expecting it to break, but I want to make sure it's breaking when I'm expecting it to break. Okay, no, it broke how I wanted it to break. Great. See this message body provider not found exception. Okay, that's weird. What's it got going on there? Well, when we take an object, we have to marshal it down to something to dump it out. I'm going to go a step further, and I'm going to change this from produces text plain to application.xml, and save that. And it's going to give me the same error. And I'm kind of belaboring this point because I'm going to let you in on a little secret, and that's that developers are really, really lazy. And what I mean by that, yep, see, let's refresh it again. What I mean by that is this, all right? To marshal this, I have to come over here inside my code and go to car and add an @XML root element. Okay? You've been bit by this before. So now it's going to go through and reload. I'm going to pull my browser up again. And when I refresh this, okay, there is my car. All right, it dumps out my car and I make my model. All right, I had to add that XML root element on there. Kind of seems a little lame to me, but you can look at it. It's pretty useful in terms of it was smart and took my object type and made that the root element. Took my various fields, and I got a stupid box I'll rip for you. Took my fields, my private members, and said make and model, and made those elements. Okay. Well, what if I want to change the name of that? Maybe I don't like make, or maybe I want to make them uppercase. All right. Well, I got to go over here and do @XML element, and come in here, and now I can go through and start setting up things like I want the name to be something different. So I want the name of this to be make. For just this one, I want this one all uppercase. I don't know. Push that out. If I refresh this, maybe. I really broke it. Try it on the getter. Let me try doing one thing a little different. Nope. That's not. Okay, there. Move down to getter. Some of the annotations work in number variables, some of them work on getters. It's kind of the same problem Hypermedia has going on. So now I can go through and rename those elements. All right. Some people argue that I get my model a little bit dirty by having things that I'm trying to represent on my UI, by having to annotate my model. Tomato, tomato, I don't care. It works just fine. If it really bugs you, create DTO classes that you shove those objects into and have them create themselves off the clone objects and dump that stuff out.
5 minutes left.
5 minutes?
Yeah.
You started me 5 minutes late. I'm kidding. Let me skip ahead. I'll skip the slides. I want to show you a problem, though, with JSON. This is not a REST thing. This is not a Jersey thing. This is every framework inside of Java does this stupid. So if you're using CXF, if you're using Spring, if you're using Jersey, they all do this stupid. And I'll show you what I mean by this. So let's go back and switch this over to produce JSON. And I will tell you right now, this is one of the slides that I had. To get JSON support, you have to go to your POM and uncomment this little guy right here to get JSON support. And all it does is it brings the dependency in and puts it on the class path for you, and voila, you can use it. So I've saved that. Let me restart this. Now, if I refresh this, notice that my ID is still all capitalized. Okay, wait a second. I'm not doing XML anymore. So why is XML root element and XML element making my ID all capitalized? Because every framework out there for converting an object to JSON converts it to XML first. All right, so if you're using a framework out there and you say, oh, I don't care about XML, I'm just producing it as JSON, I don't care about XML, wrong. Your object goes from Java to XML, from XML to JSON. Why? Because we spent a decade writing XML parsers, and we made them really smart, we made them really efficient, and everybody went, man, that was a lot of work. I'm not going to go rewrite all those parsers just so I could skip it and go to JSON. All right, so there's your whatever framework you're using, whatever tool you're using, I don't care which one it is, they're all lazy. They convert your Java objects to XML to turn around and convert it to JSON. Yeah?
Is there an annotation for the JSON object, or do you have to have the XML?
That's a good question. You can use the Jackson annotations in there. I honestly, every example you're going to Google, everything you're going to pull up is going to tell you to use the XML annotation to do it. You can get down to the Jackson implementation at that level and start using Jackson's JSON annotations inside there, and they work. and it's JSON, not JSON. So if you're saying JSON, put it, just to make everybody mad. But yeah, you can do that. All right, I think I covered most of it. Let's look at, we did XML development. The client. I don't think I can write you a client in 3 minutes, but I'll sure try if you want. So for the client, new, let's do a package. This is where I like the multi-module project better than doing this all in one Maven structure, is I have these in separate jars. The client's in a separate jar, the model classes are in an API jar, and the server stuff's in its own separate jar, and they're just Maven dependencies. Inside of this, you know what, I'll just show you. I've got a solution here I'll show you, because there's no sense in you guys watching me type as fast as I can to make it happen. This is what your client code looks like, and I'll just walk through some cool features of this. As I talked about with the 200 and the 404 errors and all that stuff, all I have to do to create this is create a web target. This is, if you look at other examples, they're old if they're different from this, because this just changed with the 2.0 release. The web target is now a condensed version to just go to a URL. To get into the semantics of it, this is kind of an endpoint or a resource, a URI instead of a URL, where these are my individual URLs or my endpoints. So I have a URI of my application. Then I go say I want a response, and it hands back the response object. As you've seen, I can stick whatever I want in that response object. It can be any objects I want in there. And then I can check to see that my status was 200. And this one I took the poor man's way out. I could put a nice switch statement here, but I took the poor man's way out and just said, if it's not 200, throw a runtime exception. All right? And then I can return my actual entity here, and they're nicely using generics to where I can say, return the car class. So I return the car class out of this method. So look how slick that is for a client. And now I control their experience. They aren't wondering what to do with exception handling. They aren't wondering what to do with errors. I control that experience for them and roll out that API flow. That's a car client. I think I'm out of time.
Yep.